In this video, we're going to look at regression and progression, or self-sabotage and success in the context of identity. So an identity is a pattern, a habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And the ego, or I, identifies with the pattern, with the habit. All that we are, whether it's a body in a habitual vibration, whether it's a statement in a habitual repetition, whether it's a belief that we remember, reassemble, and reassemble again and again, all that we are when we say I is that which attaches to, associates itself with a series of habits. Now, the ego's greatest fear is the fear of death, because the death of the pattern, the radical change of the pattern, is the end of identity, right? There's this incredibly vulnerable moment for the I when the pattern is broken. It's called trauma. It's called shock. Like, my structure is broken, and I don't exist because the I identifies it's got to hold on to something. And so what happens with regression is we go back to the foundation. We can, you can do a variety of different ways of kind of communicating that. But when we are born, we are forming patterns that are working, meaning they kept us alive. They brought us to this point. And as we continue to grow, we refine, we iterate, we replace old patterns with new patterns. And the identity stays relatively stable, right? But the identity, the I, is so frightened of death, so frightened of non-existence, that it will attach to just about anything in a state of extreme shock that seems stable. And always in that state of uncertainty and fear of the unknown, the I goes to the past. That worked before. Let's go back to what we did when we were 2 years old, when we were 1 year old. Those are strong identities, right? They didn't fail us, or we wouldn't be alive. So when we're challenged in pivotal ways, when we do not know where we are going, we tend to regress. We go back to the past and cling to the past until we have a stable path to the future. We cling to the past until we have a stable path to the future. So let's look at this tension between the future and the past. Well, first of all, in evolutionary terms, all things are evolving in complexity, right? Things are becoming more complex, more conscious. And in doing so, there is the propensity, there is the possibility to move towards grace. And this is best understood in the intersection between the system and reality. Reality is infinitely complex. It is spherical. It is the possibility field. It moves out infinitely in all directions. The possibility field is moving out in all directions, and throughout our history and our limited history in, quote, science over the last 500 or so years, we've increasingly expanded the possibility field, right? We are now living beyond the bridge of belief, beyond the horizon of what was possible for a human being even 1,000 years ago. And if you continue that trajectory, if you understand how far ahead we are of the 1,000 or 2,000-year-old ancestor in technology, in language, in awareness, in mechanics and engineering and genetics, we understand that in instrumentation, measuring, observing, space travel. That's 2,000 years. And in that period, we have repeatedly blown the barrier. We've blown through. We've cracked and penetrated the barrier of possibility. Repeatedly in just 2,000 years, where the majority, this can never happen, that could never happen. That's not humans' place, right? If Goddess wanted people to fly, she would have given them wings, right? We've gone so far beyond that in 2,000 years, which is not even a blink of an eye when we look at the tens of billions of years of iterative evolution within our universe, which may be one of many. Well, it takes a certain amount of hubris, doesn't it, to pretend that we have any idea about the next trillion years of evolution. To stand in a tiny, in a tiny skin, right? And look out through these 5 basic orifices that have, developed ecologically over millions of years from the limitation of just 5 instruments and the observing ability of trying to make sense of those 5 instruments. To look out of just 5 windows and pretend that we have any clue about the next trillion years, other than that it will be vastly bigger than the last 10 billion years, more complex, more conscious, more dimensional, an exponentially increasing possibility field, not of what's actually possible. I think a good default assumption is that anything and everything is possible. But of what is, right? And of what we can recognize, what we can put together and understand within our observing and measuring devices as possible. Right? So this is the tension, the vastness, the fact that the universe has only been around for, there's discussion, but let's just say 25 billion years. But it doesn't have any end in sight, right? When do you think the universe is going to come to an end? And what about that more than 1 trillion probable life-affirming planets? We know that there's over 1 billion life-affirming planets in our kind of region of the galaxy that may have life, that may have had life, that if you give it enough time, almost certainly will have life, right? If you make a chance environment, if you roll dice for 25 billion years, yes, certain things are going to happen every now and again, right? But if you roll dice for 1 trillion years, you just keep rolling just in our area alone, 1 billion planets, 1 billion planets. Let's, over and over and over again, year after year for 1 trillion years. Does anyone have the hubris to imagine that in 1 trillion years, thousands of times more time than we've had, that something grander, something more beautiful, more sophisticated, more intelligent would emerge out of that probability field, out of that possibility field? When you have an infinite amount of time to roll the dice, again and again and again, at any point, the chances could align and life gets off to the running again. And again, we've, 30,000 years? Civilization, estimates range, right? If you listen to some of the renegades, right, it's at least 30,000 years of intelligent life, intelligent ancient civilizations. If you listen to the conventionalists, right, the people that think we're the most important thing, well, then, we're it, right? But it's a pretty big progression, and I think that's part of the crisis of our ego, the I. Like, how does it identify? How does it hold on to something so ephemeral, to something so unpredictable, right? It's predictable. Life has become more ever since it was born, right? The universe was born some billions of years ago. It's become more. The universe is maturing. It's becoming more and more and more sophisticated, more beautiful, more true, more complex, more intelligent than it was when it was just a burst of energy. So that's hard to attach to. And as an ego, we've all been traumatized. Traumatized is the experience of shattering, right? It's when the structure of identity falls away and layers that we've been dependent on just blow off. When you live on the side of a mountain and it gets covered in lava, and every familiar pattern that you've known before is washed away in red-hot lava. People you've known buried, houses, structures, vegetable gardens, diets. When that's shattered and you come down, I don't know who I am in this situation. I have not discovered it. The more traumatized we are, we tend to predict a traumatic future. And predicting death for the ego, predicting shattering for the ego is a crisis, is a trauma for the ego. It is hard to face the unknown. And so we go back. We are crushed. We hide. No, I want something certain. I want a father figure, perhaps a punishing God. I want a mother figure. They can be cruel, they can abandon me, but I want it to be stable. I want to understand what's going on. And every identity, every pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being at each of our ages has emerged out of a constellation, right? It's emerged out of an ecology. These things were going on in our environments. And as they were going on in our environment, we needed to develop a relationship with reality, right? That is the imperative of life. To breathe in the air, to breathe out carbon dioxide, to consume water, to urinate fertilizer, to consume food, right? To vacate fertilizer for the plants that provided for us, this relay, this relationship of energy is imperative at all times. And how do we relate? How do we explore and relate to trauma? To an overwhelming energy, an energy that is bigger than us, right? We are all pinballs. And reality is a bowling ball. And reality has its cycles, some that take 10,000 years, some that take 60 million years. Right? 60 million years ago, an asteroid hit this planet. And there's a cycle. There's a 24-hour cycle. There's a cycle of the breath. Right? There's a cycle of waking and sleeping. All of reality are patterns. The electron spins around the proton. The earth spins around the sun. We wake and we sleep. We breathe in, we breathe out. It's all patterns. And as our patterns, right, as our patterns, the ones we attach to, collide with bigger patterns that we do not identify with, we are sent flying, right? The law of mass dictates that when a pinball and a bowling ball collide, the pinball goes flying. The bowling ball continues. The larger pattern continues as the smaller pattern is disrupted by the larger pattern. Right? But in that moment of disruption, of egolessness, right? The ego can feel shame. The ego can feel terrified of death and come back stronger, looking to grab onto something that cannot be broken. And those are often in the past, right? Let's go back to the farm and grow food. Let's keep our head down and don't speak up to anyone so they won't hurt us. Right? That worked as a 2-year-old or as a 5-year-old. Right? As a 5-year-old, every time Big Brother did something, broke the rules, etc., and we said, Mom, you know, Harry's sneaking dessert, right? And Big Brother, you know, had his revenge, right? Well, in that context, like what works? Like, okay, I don't want the revenge. The revenge lasts 3 hours. You know, I just get a little bit of a benefit for pointing out Harry's mistakes. So that just takes a second, a minute to have that exchange, but then there's 3 hours of pain around that. So I'm not going to speak out. And the pain stops. And we learn the new pattern. Don't speak up. Don't speak out. Or there will be pain from someone who could kill us, right? And that becomes the new pattern, right? And the question is, when do we grow out, right? In order for evolution to occur, we've got to evolve, right? Evolve. Re-evolve. We've got to move. We've got to change from one pattern to another pattern in order to evolve. Right? We've got to change from one pattern to another pattern. And as we let go of the familiar, the family, as we let go of the old pattern and reach for the new pattern, it is tenuous. There is vulnerability. If you are smart, there is uncertainty, right? Because only a fool goes into territory they've never been in before with the arrogance of certainty. Right? Anyone who goes into a completely new environment, another country, another culture, another biological environment, another planet, and steps out of the plane and is shocked that the oxygen level isn't the same as it was on Earth, is a fool, right? Because they're clinging so desperately, their need for certainty is so great that they lack the humility to perceive what's different, right? And that it's not personal, right? That planet didn't mix its atmosphere specifically to kill them, right? That planet has been there for billions of years, doing its thing, right? But we're going into the unknown, right? And the unknown is bigger than the known. The unknown carries countless threats and countless blessings that we lack the eyes to recognize and thus navigate, right? And so we need humility as we go into the unknown. Now, when we think of regression, it's a devolution, right? What does it mean, right? It means that we took a wrong step, right? That's what regression means. We took a wrong step. Now, it's important to understand that we're not dealing with reality, right? When we say this is the world, we're not talking about the world. We're talking about our model of the world. Now, what is a model? It's made up of language, right? And it involves a series of bifurcating points. Right? Models are based on assumptions and choice points, right? You're 5 years old. Your best friend is getting bullied, right? So that was a choice point, right? To bully young people or not to bully them, right? But the culture has allied itself with bullying. So, okay, bullying is a norm. Now, what happens when you side with your bullied friend or when you dissociate from your bully friend? Well, if you dissociate from your bullied friend and the pain stops, then you must decide what to do about it, right? You must decide, does that mean I'm a coward or does that mean I'm a pragmatist, right? So you make that decision. Let's say you decide you're a pragmatist, and pragmatists abandon people under attack. Well, as you have children who are vulnerable, are you a pragmatist or do you restructure it, right? And these models of reality that we build with language, that we superimpose upon reality with language, these models, they're all wrong because they're composed out of a grid of language that's too simple, right? Let's take the body, for example, right? Well, language is a grid of symbols, right? So if we're talking crudely, and that just means without attention to detail, we would say this is a head, this is a torso, these are legs, right? That's the body, right? This is the right side, the left side, this is an arm, this is a hand. It's just it isn't, right? This is not just a head. This is two ears, it's a mouth. A mouth isn't just a mouth, it's two lips. Now, if the mouth doesn't work without the lungs, try talking without any lungs, then the mouth doesn't speak, the lungs speak, through the mouth, right? And the more you get into whatever model you're saying, this is no, this is reality. You know, this is my thumb. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's not yours. And it's not separate from every other thing, right? What is the thumb? It's this point here, right? No, it isn't. It's actually trillions of subatomic particles. Yeah, but that's too complicated, right? And that's the point, right? Every model of reality is dumbed down to a level where we can perceive it through our lens of language, our lens of consciousness, but it's not real. It's a model we've superimposed very, very loosely, very, very crudely on reality. And because our model of reality isn't real, because it's crude, because it's composed of language, of words that are chunky, right? A hand is a chunk. It's very chunky. So you say, my hand is what? Well, the hand does this, right? No, it doesn't. You cut the hand off and pretend for the moment that the word is correct, that that's what hands do. And it's no longer, quote, a hand, because it can no longer do that. Right? You can't talk about the hand without the body. Now, if you can't talk about the hand without the body, and you can't talk about the body without the hand, in reality, then the words are an illusion, right? They're creating this illusion that somehow the hand grew on its own. It didn't. It grew out of a body. It grew out of an ecology. That the moment grew out of its own accord, but it didn't. It grew out of the past. 1 trillion years from now, what's happening right now will have influence. Right? 1 trillion years from now, there will be very, very small things that are different because of what we're doing today. So what's happening today is connected with 1 trillion years from now, and it's connected with the Big Bang. And so we're building models of reality that are crude, that are not reality, that don't begin to comprehend the complexity of a single finger for a single minute at the level of subatomic particles. Right? Now, when you say, well, let's just delete the subatomic particles, we don't need to talk about those. You kind of do, though, because the atomic particles don't exist without the subatomic particles. The molecules don't exist without the atoms. Right? The skin doesn't exist without the molecules, so that's part of the hand. The bones don't either. You do kind of have to talk about the body that grew the hand, and you have to talk about the planet that grew the body, and you have to talk about the past that grew the present. You have to talk about the future that emerges out of the present. You kind of have to talk about everything. And you can dumb it down and say, well, for argument's sake, and it's a good argument, let's just say that this is a hand. Let's just pretend that our model of reality is reality because it's a good model. It's useful up to a point. And the point is the point that it shatters, right? Every model of reality shatters at one point or another in one environment or another because it isn't real. It's a crude symbol of reality. And so we build these models on these trees, right? And then we reach dead ends. We reach points where the model predicts something, but it doesn't happen. What does that mean? It means our model is wrong. It doesn't mean that we're wrong. It means our model is wrong. But we're acting on the assumption of the model, and it's not working. Our model is wrong. That's what it means. Now, if our model is wrong, then we will encounter a trauma. A trauma is where a large energy touches us in a way that breaks our model of reality and we lose our identity. I don't know who I am anymore, which means I don't know how to function. I don't have a model of reality that works because it's too complicated. If I do this, there will be this problem. If I do that, there'll be this other problem. I don't know what to do. We get paralyzed. Right? I don't know what happens if I do this and this. I don't know. Right? Our model doesn't work anymore. What do we do when our model doesn't work, right? Well, what the ego defaults to doing is going back to the past. I know what worked when I was 2. I sulked, I cried, and Mom came and took care of me. The model isn't working. Reality is imploding. I'm going to sulk, and I'm going to wait for Mom to protect me, right? But that model worked in the past. Mom was there, but it's still there in the body. The body seeks the comfort, the familiar, the family. Things didn't work out, let me go back home. I'll live at home for a while and regroup. My model didn't work there. Let's go out and try it again, right? Let me go back. This is the default of the ego, to go back and back until there's something that works, that doesn't crash. I'll just be very small and I won't say anything, and eventually people will stop hating me. We go back to as far as we need to. We regress. And when there's an overwhelming trauma, an overwhelming symphony of chaos, of energy that we cannot digest, that presents the death of the ego, we don't want to go forward into that chaos. It's too big, it's too complicated. We want something that's safe, that's familiar. This is the regression and tension conversation in our lives. It's also the sabotage and success, right? Because to succeed at something, we have to do something new. We have to do something different. We have to do something better than other people in most cases, and better than what we've done before, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be a success. It would be a status quo. Success, by its very definition, is progress, right? To now, today there are many millionaires, for example. But there was a time when to be a millionaire would be one of the richest people in the world. And so it would be a great success. Now, not so much, right? And if you were a millionaire or you were a 2 millionaire and you go back to being a millionaire, that's not a success, right? So it's not about the position, it's about the progression from one thing to another, from one thing to another better thing. That's growth, that's success, that's evolution. That's what matters, the progression forward. But when it doesn't work repeatedly, when we find ourselves stuck in conflict over and over again, and we come back, that's regression, right? To go back into fight, flight, and freeze, back into the reptilian brain, that's regression, right? What do we do? Right? What do we do when we regress? When we go back to the past, when we won't go forward for fear of the unknown, for fear of dying, for fear of breaking as a pattern. This is the crisis of the ego. And it's also when When we think of self-sabotage, like I created the job, I had the interview, and then I showed up and I looked like this and I waited to be hit. I was frozen. And I was so relieved that the boss or the prospective boss didn't hit me and shame me, right? What was happening there? When we were 5 years old and summoned to the principals, when we were 5 years old and summoned to mom and dads who hit us repeatedly and who hit us more when we said, it's not fair, this isn't right. They hit us more. So eventually we learned that that didn't work, and we developed this pattern of waiting to be hit and then left alone. And this was success for the 5-year-old. This was the pinnacle of success, to not be beaten more than we were beaten before. To have the beatings become more verbal. Oh, you useless piece of shit. But there was only one slap. Yes, you're right, I'm a useless piece of shit. Freedom, right? Success. The 5-year-old cracked the abuse protocol, right? All they have to do is take on the inadequacy, the shame of the abuser, the incompetence, right? And blame themselves, so that the abuser felt better about themselves, right? Because when the abuser hits a child, and the child says, hey, you dumb fuck. Hey, you're the idiot that went off and got drunk. You're the idiot who can't keep a job. You're the idiot who can't pay rent. Right? You're the idiot with a 6th grade education. And you're blaming me, a 5-year-old, for one mistake? That if you were a competent parent, you would have prevented anyway? Really? Okay. You dumb fuck, right? Have at it, right? You're the big one. Hit me again, you dumb fuck, right? That would have gotten the 5-year-old killed, right? Because the shame-based, powerless person that does that to a 5-year-old cannot stand being wrong, cannot stand to hear their incompetence, right? And they're big, right? They're big. They can kill the 5-year-old. Not because they're smart, not because they're right, but because they're big. So when the 5-year-old figures out, don't tell the truth, don't stand up to power, don't hit back, but collapse. You're right, it's all my fault. I'm stupid, I'm bad, it's all my fault. And the abuse stops. You're right, you're an ungrateful, horrible kid, now get out of my sight. And the kid trembles out, right? Right? All that small, terrified feeling, all that helplessness, all that self-hatred in the abuser is now transformed, and the abuser feels like, my goodness, aren't I mighty, right? A 5-year-old walked out of here devastated because of me. That's how important I am, right? So the 5-year-old has cracked, the gold mine, right? This is how you live another year. And that's what the 5-year-old knows how to do on pain of death. Meaning, if you offer a 5-year-old $1 million if they'll fight the abuse, they're not interested. Fuck you, $1 million, right? I'm just trying to live another year, right? That'll come later, right? The 5-year-old is interested in what resolves and minimizes trauma in a sick family Is there any other, right? What does sick mean? It just means it's out of tune. It's out of alignment. Everything is out of alignment, right? Every culture, every personality every individual is out of tune to some degree or another, right? And it's a progression. You want to get better. You want to get more in tune. You want to be more successful. You want to be more accurate, less crazy, right? That's the progression. But this is the crisis, right? This is the crisis for a 5-year-old, and they solve it, and they're not interested in anything else. Now, at some point, the 5-year-old gets bigger, right? Maybe they get to be a teenager, right? You see, my mother used to beat me to deflect irritation. It was just irritating. Just anytime I would bring her inadequacy to her attention, that was irritating for her. So she would kind of hit me to kind of beat away that feeling, just get it out of here, right? But by the time I was 14, it had sunk in for some time that I was bigger, stronger. That why am I just accepting this beating? Doesn't really make much sense, does it? It makes sense for a 5-year-old that would get beaten more, but why am I, a 14-year-old, accepting this beating? And that's when the transition comes in. Mom, you may not have noticed it, but I am now bigger than you. I'm actually bigger than Michael, right? I'm bigger than Dad too. And I don't want to continue this agreement to be beaten to manage your impatience, your irritation with feeling frustrated with life, right? I don't want to keep doing that for the rest of my life. Now, you don't care enough about your son, about dignity, about fairness, about intelligence. You don't care enough about those things to stop hitting me for your stupidity. So that argument isn't working, is it? No, right? Because if you were swayed by those arguments, you'd have stopped a long time ago, right? It wasn't fair when I was 5. It's not fair today. It wasn't rational then. It's not rational now. It wasn't kind then. It's cruel today. It's humiliating. It's cruel. And if you cared more about your child than about your own self-centeredness, well, you would have stopped. But that's not what's driving this, is it, right? You're self-centered, narcissistic, and you want relief from those feelings, right? Which aren't feeling good, right? And hitting me seems to work. It's always worked before, and so you're going to keep doing it until, right? So this is the pivot point. Until you start feeling worse because you hit me. That's the point when the pattern shifts, right? Because you're hitting me to feel better, and it's working. And I'm accepting the hitting to feel better than it would if you retaliated. And that's working. But there's a change going on, right? The body is changing. That strategy is, it's not the best strategy. Right? But it takes a big crisis. It takes a challenge to change identity, to change our patterns in a radical way, right? From helplessness to fighting back in this sense. Now, this pattern in my family system shifted when I told my mother, it didn't shift there because that would be rational, but when I told my mother that I would calculate the intensity, because I didn't want to become a bully, right? And used my superior strength the way she had, right? She was huge when I was 5 years old. And now I'm huge compared to her. I didn't want to reverse that. I just wanted to kind of cut the pattern, right? You know, and this is where, you know, some of the more Pollyanna, you know, turn the other cheek and all this type of stuff, I think, you know, deserves some scrutiny, some skepticism. You know, that walk peacefully and carry a big stick has, you know, certainly in this instance, you know, something to be learned from, right? Because what I said was, Mom, right? Well, she didn't feel very motherly, so I called her Sherilyn, her name. I said, Cheryl, you're going to keep hitting me, obviously. So what I'm going to do is I'm never going to initiate violence towards you, right? That's your role. And you don't ever have to do it again. But anytime that you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Now, if you slap me in the face at 20 pounds of pressure, I'll get a sense of your body weight. And I'll slap you in the face with 20 pounds of pressure. And I'm not doing it because I want to hurt you. I want you to understand that it's no longer going to be expedient, convenient, to turn your hatred and frustration onto me as the easiest path of getting rid of your feelings that you are generating with sustained incompetence, right? Your incompetence is creating messed up reality. You don't want to learn, right, and talk, right? That would be intelligent, but you're going to be in pain around that. And you're giving all that pain to me, but I can't change your behavior. Well, of course, you know, she ignored it, right, because it's all about her. But after the first 3 slaps, right, she went to Michael, right? She went to Michael to complain. Your son, right? In a blame family system, you never take responsibility. Like, I was the one that didn't take birth control and got pregnant and chose to marry this person. No. But it's always yours, right? Your son is hitting me. Just do something, right? The trouble is he is also a little smaller than me at this point and didn't want to be hit, right? And he understood, you know, he wasn't quite as narcissistic in that way. He wasn't self-absorbed. You know, so he didn't really do something. So she stopped hitting me, right? And that was that was a pivot point, right? And so you could say that this, I'm a bad person, please tell me what to do and don't hit me anymore, moved into, you know, a calculated environment of blow for blow. I'm not going to escalate, but if you want to be slapped, go ahead and slap me, right? That stopped the violence, right? That worked. Hooray, right? And, you know, and this is, I think, what's so important to understand with evolution. Every single thing that's going on in the world today is being done because it worked in the past. Or maybe it's working right now, right? Drinking a bottle of wine and not having nightmares that night is working. I mean, screw the job, right? I'm free of my nightmares. I'm free. I can get to sleep without insomnia and, you know, I'm managing my feelings. Now, the fact that we're getting evicted because I can't hold down the job is another problem, right? Well, now the pattern needs to iterate, right? And the point that these patterns iterate is when the pain of sustaining them becomes bigger than the pain of changing them. In a traumatic, pain-based reality, the pivot point is not, oh, it would be fun to change this. That's not the mindset of the reptilian brain, which is the traumatized brain. The mindset of the traumatized brain is, I'm more certain here, I'm more uncertain there, and I want certainty because I don't want to die. That's the mindset of the reptilian brain. And there are very few things that provide as much certainty as doing exactly what you've done for 10 years, producing the exact same result, which is very reliable. I'm not going to die anytime soon, says the traumatized ego. I know who I am, right? I'm a useless person who does this and this and this all the time. I always fail at everything. And I know exactly who I am, right? It's wonderful, right? Certainty comes before enjoyment for the traumatized individual, right? And these models iterate, right? And then came dissociation. Dissociation was better than retaliation. What I meant was, as soon as I could leave the house, which I did at age 17, I did. Because now I didn't have to either be hit or hit my mother in order to have well-being. I could have nothing to do with her, right? So dissociation, which a 5-year-old cannot do, right? My 14-year-old couldn't do it. Why? Well, legal systems. You know, you can't get a job at 14, right? They don't teach you in high school how to take care of yourself, right? Here's how you cook your food. Here's how you set a routine. Here's how you manage your time. Here's how you start a business. No, these are useful things, so they're not taught in school, right? So, you know, a 14-year-old, I'm stuck here. I'm either going to be beaten or I have to do something to discourage the beating. But now I'm free, right? Now I can dissociate. I don't like it, so I can dissociate. Right? I don't like that, I'll dissociate. I don't like that, I'll remove myself. I'm not going to fight. I'm going to remove myself, right? But that environment, that pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing and being also has challenges, right? Because you can be backed into a corner, right? I found myself at different points, like I've backed out of this relationship. I've backed out of that relationship with all these people that did not want to relate in a way that I thought was healthy for both people. But I'm feeling alone, right? I've backed out of here, but where do I go, right? And so that becomes the new crisis. And then to create a place, to create an environment, to create a place that I want to go, that becomes then necessary, right? If you back out of, oh, I don't like that, I don't like that, that's not good, that's not good. Okay, I'm dissociated from this. And it's working, right? Nothing. No one's insulting me here. No one's doing this. No one's doing this. But where are the this that I long for? Where's the that? Like, that's not coming out of a vacuum, right? That needs to be created. That needs to be created. And so the identity must move towards, and that's like, I don't know how to create. The ego doesn't know what it's doing, right? So this is the crisis, right? I tried to create that, didn't work. Tried to create that, didn't work. Tried to create that, didn't work. It's not working, right? The creation isn't working. Right? Maybe I have to be alone and lonely forever, right? Because I can dissociate. Oh, you want to bully and do this? Okay, well, that's the end of that relationship. Oh, you don't want to invest any energy in making it equal and stuff? You want me to do all the work? Okay, that's the end of that relationship. Oh, you want to be sexually possessive, but you don't want to be sexual. Meaning you don't want me to have sex with anyone else, but you don't want to have sex with me. Oh, I see. Well, that's not going to work. And that's not going to work. And you don't want to talk, but that is kind of the only way that we communicate. So, all right, that's not going to work, right? So how do we, so that works. Like that's a pretty simple protocol. Dissociate. But where do you go from there, right? How do we create something bigger, something better? This is a crisis. The ego doesn't know, right? All patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being are generally the child learns and copies them, the adolescent criticizes them, but who comes in to create something bigger and better than what's before? You know, and that's really the challenge. That's the challenge. That's the uncertainty, right, of all of this, right? That's the challenge. That's the uncertainty of a new pattern of identity, right? And if that doesn't work, the ego will go back to dissociation. Try to associate, go back to dissociation. But this is how identity evolves and de-evolves. And what sabotage looks like is when we're up here, we're trying to build a new framework, a new pattern of thinking, feeling, and speaking that's never existed before. The 5-year-old says, no, just accept all the abuse and wait 30 minutes and then they'll walk away and stop hitting you, right? The adolescent is saying, no, hit him back. Wherever they hit you, get him back or they won't stop. And the young adult is saying, no, this is fucked up. Just back out of here. That's fucked up. Look at that, right? They said they're into helping nonprofits and they just inflated their hours. They just tried to steal from a nonprofit. Get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that, right? Dissociate. And there will be peace, right? Dissociate and there will eventually become loneliness, separation from everything, right? And then dissociate, create. So there's a competition within the ego, and the ego is trying to say, I just want to know who I am. I just want to survive. I just want to know that I'm not going to die, that I'm going to be safe, that I'm going to survive. And I've never created before. So anyone else got some ideas? Well, do this, do that, right? So self-sabotage is regression to an earlier thing that worked at that time in an environment where progression, evolution is uncertain and not working. Now, when we fail in a major way, we not only regress, but we question our trees, right? Like if our child dies and we thought we were successful and now we're in so much misery and pain, it's not working, right? So we have to go back, right? We have to say, okay, wait a minute. Okay, so the last thing we decided was to buy a house. The thing before that we decided was money was more important than time with family. And the thing before that we decided was we're going to have kids without thinking. And the thing we decided was we weren't going to learn parenting skills, and we were going to do this, and we were going to get married because we had sexual arousal. And I was going to get married because that's the thing that things were done, right? Okay, so I'm back here. That's where I made my mistake, right? I said that I should do what other people do. Meaning there was a choice point that said, do what other people are doing because that's the way things are done, or think things through for yourself and do them differently. And I went this way. And then because I said that's the way things were done, these were the two choices of the way things were done, and I went this way. And I went this way. I went this way. And now I'm in massive amount of pain with a dead child. Because the way things are done is you don't learn competent parenting. no formal training for it. You have kids with the person you want to have sex with. You don't look at abuse and intergenerational abuse patterns in the family. That's the way things are done, and so that's what I'm going to do. And it didn't work, right? I'm devastated. I don't want to live. So I've got to go all the way back down the tree, and the more root the question is, the more traumatized, the more upset the ego is, because when you go back to these deep fundamental choices, over here we have normalcy and conformity and lack of thought. Over here we have happiness at the expense of normalcy. Meaning, if you want to be happier than the average person, you can't do what the average person does. You can't think what the average person thinks. You can't feel what the average person feels. You've got to diverge. You've got to deviate from the norm. And this terrifies every ego, because you're confronting the unknown, and with it the fear of death, with it pain. You're confronting that. It's tough. You're going into a new pattern. It hasn't been done before. It's tough. You generally only do it in a traumatized culture because it's too painful to carry on the way that you've done, right? You've walked down that path and you've hit too many dead ends. It's too painful. So you walk all the way down the decision-making tree. You find where the flaw is and you pick the other route, right? But there's a deeper flaw than that, right? Because down here is the flaw of either-or thinking, right? Chauvinism says that one way is better than the other, and so you have to choose. This person or this person. That's a very deep bit of code there, right? But you could have chosen that you could do both and in many situations, that one was not necessarily all or nothing. You could have chosen that. Now, what if you chose to take, rather than where it's either or, and then you're doing all these decision-making trees, what if you chose both and you now progressed making multiple simultaneous decisions. I'm going to do some normal things and I'm going to do some abnormal things. I'm going to raise my child in some of the ways that worked, and I'm going to do other things differently that are not working. And I'm going to do little A, B, C, D experiments, and 50% of the time I'm going to do this, and 30% of the time I'm going to do that, and we're going to make a more complex model of reality. Well, simple minds don't like it. Chauvinists hate it, but maybe that's where I went wrong. Right? The fact that I've decided to be normal, I'm no longer going to associate or learn anything from the unknown. Right? Because when things don't work, it's a big knock from reality saying, hello, you don't see me very clearly. If you did, you wouldn't have killed your child. You wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have done that, right? If you saw things clearly, you wouldn't have done this thing that's ruined your life. You didn't see things clearly. Why? Because you're looking through a model. What's the problem with the model? It's not complex enough. It's not balanced enough. It doesn't show the full picture. It shows the upside, but doesn't show the downside. That's an incomplete model. That's a simple model. Shows the pros, not the cons. That's a simple model, right? So you come down and, you know, the Zen type masters usually can enjoy the moment with great freedom because they understand the pros and cons are innately linked to one another in many respects, right? They see the beauty of the full picture. This would be great for your career and terrible for your marriage. And not doing much for your meditation practice either. This would be great for your meditation practice, but not good for your 2-year-old daughter that needs to be helped in this and this and this while you want to meditate, right? And so when you really start looking at all of reality with a more complex model, right? The curse of one thing is the blessing of another. The blessing of another is a curse of a one thing, right? And where are we out of balance? Where do we need to move to find the point of grace?